Sammy Wilson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I first of all emphasise at the very outset of the comments which I want to make, points which have already been made by other honourable members during this debate. This was not brought forward because we had some selfish party political interest in this issue. We brought this debate forward because we believe that if there are to be debates about the future government and the shape of future government and the input which parties are going to have or potentially have in future government in Northern Ireland, then the public should have the widest possible information about who's going to and the ideas are going to be put forward. We've been quite happy because we recognise that even in a hung Parliament, our role may be quite marginal. We've been quite happy had it been that those parties who are most likely to form the government of the United Kingdom should have their leaders debating these issues before the general public. And we do not believe, we're not as arrogant as the BBC or as some of the other broadcasters, we do not believe that we have got some God-given right to be included just because we happen to have members in this House of Commons or because we happen to be putting forward members. But, however, once the rules were manipulated and changed and twisted and warped to include some smaller parties, but not all the smaller parties, then I believe that we did have a right to make the kind of demands that we have made to the BBC and to the broadcasters, and which indeed are included in this motion today. I don't believe that this debate and the debate about the debate has done politics any good at all. And I've got to say, despite what has been said, I do not see this as a problem which was made by politicians, although some people would happily point the finger at the Prime Minister. They would happily point the finger at the Leader of the Opposition. This was primarily a problem caused by the broadcasters, who, and we can interpret whatever the motives were, and we'll all probably have our own interpretations of that. Was it simply that they believed that they could imperiously wave the finger at the politicians of this country and tell them, we will give you broadcasting time, here are the conditions on which you will have that broadcasting time, and if you do not obey the rules that we have set down, we will punish you? That could be one interpretation. Another interpretation is that they simply wanted to sex up the broadcasts and saw that perhaps a good head-to-head and a good row between the Prime Minister and the Leader of UKIP would do the job. No. Or it could be that they simply, as many people on the other side, and I've got some sympathy with the views of some of the members on the other side, who believe that given the left-wing bias of the BBC, that they wanted to have someone there who would be taking on the Prime Minister, while at the same time, and I'll give wait a minute, because I have got a great belief in the left-wing bias of the BBC, and indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, were you to give me time, and I know that you won't because I'd be diverging from this motion, I could wax eloquent on it for a long, long time in this debate, but I'll not do so. But I'll give way to the member.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that this left-line bias of the BBC with regards to these broadcasts, that opens up again a proper debate that should take place about whether we should be paying licence fees for such an organisation to exist?
And, Mr Deputy Speaker, before I get into a discussion on licence fees, the payment of licence fees, the non-payment of licence fees, the compulsory payment of licence fees or whatever, I will desist because, again, it's another favourite topic that I have, but I know not quite relevant to the motion we have before us. But whatever the reason for it, we now do have a shambles which is unbecoming.
That's right. And
which I don't believe is doing politics any good. I do believe, and I think that there is a general desire amongst the public, despite what is said about politics and how rubbishy people think politicians are in this country, they do want to hear debates on these issues. But if there are going to be debates, they've got to be in a format which is fair and a format which is properly structured. And the shambles that we have now is not becoming, and I believe does further disrepute to politics in this country. We have put forward a case which I believe is an unassailable case, that if the debate is to be opened up, and I again add the qualification to all of that which has been put forward by members of the Alliance Party, the SDLP and ourselves on this issue, that we would prefer to see a much tighter arrangement. But if it is to be opened up, then there are absolutely no grounds for saying that the fourth largest party in this House, a party which, albeit only stands in a regional capacity, but nevertheless is no different in that than what Plaid Cymru or the SNP would be, who have got more members than many of the smaller parties which will be included, and which potentially could have the same influence as all of those parties, should be excluded. And especially, and the point that the member for North Belfast made in his speech, especially since it is not like we operate in some kind of bubble in Northern Ireland, where some of the parties that will be participating in a debate will not be competing against some of the members on this side. I will have a UKIP opposition. I may even have a Conservative opposition. I'll have by proxy a Labour opposition in the form of the SDLP. I'll have by proxy opposition from the Liberal Democrats in the form of the Alliance Party, and there will even be. When I say opposition, and when I say a competitor, I use it in the loosest possible sense of the word, because they will be somewhere away down the bottom of the piles of votes when it comes to counting up the and of course, yes, I will have opposition from the Greens. But given the fact that the Greens in Northern Ireland want to stop the good constituents of East Antrim eating bacon buddies on a Monday in order to save the planet, and don't want them to see adverts to fly to the Mediterranean because they'll put too much CO2 in the air, and because
I think we'll both agree. I'm not sure this is going to enhance the debate between the leaders of the parties, and I'm sure you want to get back to where we need to be. Sammy Wilson.
The point that I'm making is that maybe I choose what the point
you're making is, and the point is you're off beat. Get back on to
explain it to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The point I'm making is this: that the inclusion of the Greens in this debate, or the non-inclusion of the Greens in this debate, will not make any difference, because their policies are so outlandish that nobody's going to vote for them anyway. However, they have been included, and given that they are a small party, they're a much smaller party than this party, our argument is that we ought to be included as well. Now, I fully understand, and this is the problem that's been created by the broadcasters, of course, that if we finish up with 7, as we've got at the moment, or 8, or 9 parties, then we don't have a debate And we don't even have a beauty contest either, given some of the candidates. Some of the people who be involved. What we have is a shambles, or indeed, as the member for Foyle has said, a Tower of Babel. Utter confusion, with points not being properly debated. But that's what has been created. That is what has been created by the broadcasters, and it's one of the reasons why we believe that at this stage there ought to be, even at this late stage, there ought to be some attempt to resolve this issue, either by accepting you include all of the parties which have got a sizable representation, which will be standing nationally and regionally, or else you find a way of narrowing it down. But you cannot have the worst of all worlds, where you include some and you exclude the others. Yeah. Now, the other part of the motion, of course, and one which I suppose has generated a fair range of comment, is how do we proceed? Now, the proposal for an independent body or an independent adjudication of this may well be too late for the current election. That is not to say, however, that it should not be something which we consider for future elections, because otherwise we have got the potential for this shambles to be repeated again. Because on one hand, we have got politicians who will have their own agendas, but we now know that broadcasters have their own agendas. That's right. They are no less guiltless in all of this than what some of the public may see as self-seeking politicians in the issue. And therefore, we believe that the creation of an independent body, and I know that the Minister said, well, how independent should the independent body be? And how do you make it independent? And it's already been rejected by the House of Lords. It was rejected, I believe, by the House of Lords because there was greater faith in the broadcasters than what should ever have been given. But now that we have seen that the broadcasters are incapable of that degree of independence and that degree of objectivity which would be required to ensure fair and reasonable and rational debate on these issues, then I believe that we do have to look again at an independent body. And it should be no more difficult to create an independent body to oversee broadcasting at election time than it should be to have an independent body for any other job that we require independent bodies for. So, I mean, the point that the Minister has made, how do we ensure it's going to be independent, I believe is not an issue which should cause us a great deal of concern. The second thing then, and again this has been raised by a number of members, should whatever it's decided be mandatory, as the Labour Party would like to have, or should it be voluntary? And our view, of course, is that the job of that body should be to set the rules. If the rules are set fairly, then I don't see that there will be any need for coercion, because people will be able to sign up to the conditions which have been attached, and so that you shouldn't have the unseemly row. But at the end of the day, I've got to say, I am not attracted to the participation being mandatory. There still should be the opportunity, and there still should be the right for parties to make a decision as to whether or not, even with, I'll give you a yes, even once the rules have been set, even if they've agreed to the rules, that in some circumstances, and they'll have to explain it to the electorate, they should have the opportunity to decide whether they wish to participate or not to participate. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and let me be clear that I entirely share the sentiments that he's just set out. We are not suggesting that participation in the debates would be mandatory. What would be mandatory is that the debates be held.
And that being the case, I think that once we have a framework and once we have the idea that there should be debates, yes, of course, the fact that we have debates held, but people that have the right to choose whether to participate in them is something that we would be in agreement with. The third issue was, should it be before an election campaign or after or during an election campaign? And I must say, I did find the argument that, well, if you didn't have the manifestos published, then you couldn't have a debate. I mean, what do debates consist of, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Very often, it's about looking back as much as looking forward. Yes. Looking at the record of parties in the past, because that's sometimes a far, far better way of judging what they're likely to do in the future than what might be in their manifesto. And given the cynicism that much of the electorate has about manifesto commitments, and you know, I only have to look at the party over here to think of one of the major commitments which they made and very quickly moved away from it. Maybe a debate on the basis of your manifesto is not going to be all that productive anyway. So I can see the argument for having the debate coming up to a general election, but not necessarily sucking out the lifeblood from an election campaign. Though I think, as the member for Foyle pointed out, there are many formats for debating the issues anyway. He mentioned the formats, the variety of formats which were used during the Scottish referendum debate, and whether it be straightforward head-to-head by the two main protagonists, or whether it be panel discussions or audience participation, or indeed, you know, a range of other things. There are many ways in which those broadcasts can be done, and therefore I'm not so sure that we're all that worried about the timing of them. I've got to say, I can see the point that the Prime Minister has made on this, that a debate, and especially a shambolic debate with maybe 7 different parties all fighting and squabbling for a bit of time in a 1.5-hour debate, might not be all that edifying when it comes to an election campaign, and indeed could distract from many of the other good ways in which parties and individual candidates seek to communicate with their electorate. One of the issues which, of course, we do have to get sorted out by that independent commission. I know that the member for East Belfast made the point, and the member for Foyle made the point as well, and that is, on what basis should we make judgments about the parties? And of course, that's where we'll start at this debate. Should it be all parties? Should it be parties that reach a certain threshold of members in this House? Should it be parties who are putting forward a certain number of candidates? Should they have to stand nationally? Should it be based on the last House of Westminster election results, or the last election result, or the last opinion poll? But again, those are the kinds of issues which, if we're going to have a fair framework, would need to be looked at by such an independent body. The one thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would say just in conclusion, is that we cannot afford to have the same kind of shambles as we have experienced in this election. As I say, I don't think it's becoming to democracy. I don't think it's becoming for the parties. I think that it distracts from. I suspect actually that the debate about the debate will be more interesting than the debate itself anyway, and especially if we finish up with a 7-party squabble on the TV, or one where the issue is, why is the Prime Minister not sitting there, and why is there an empty chair, or whatever. But I don't believe, I mean, there's sometimes there are things that we can be blamed for as politicians. I don't believe that the finger of blame in this instance can be primarily pointed at politicians. I think it's unfair that all of the attention is directed on the Prime Minister as well. I think that he had a reasonable case for saying that the BBC were setting rules which placed him at an unfair advantage. Why should he cooperate in their game? And if we're going to avoid that in the future, then I think that some of the proposals that we have put forward in this motion, if they're adhered to, if they're followed through, if work's done on them, we'll maybe not sort it out this time, but we can sort it out for the next election.
Minister.